Here we go.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Good afternoon. Happy spring. We're so excited to bring you another in our series from North Carolina Growing Together project in Central Carolina Community College, Small Business Center, Lee County. We are really happy to have this presentation today with Lynette, Johnston and Currey Nobles from NC State. We know food safety is on a lot of people's minds, and the regulations can be confusing, and we need to learn more about how we can advise our farmers and food processors about these safety measures. And so we're very fortunate that NC State has brought in some specialists to help around the state, and Lynette and Currey have been traveling around the state to help various food businesses and extension agents and different staff. And so we're fortunate to be able to have them today, and this webinar will be recorded and saved on YouTube, and you will also get a link for this so that you can share it with your colleagues and have it as a resource in the future. So I did want to tell you a little bit about the North Carolina Growing Together project. We're a project of the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, which most of y'all know is a collaboration between NC State, NCA&T, and NCDA. We have been working for the past 5 years, this is our 6th year, to develop farmer capacity, supply chain expansion, producer and processor capacity, which is where this really fits in, and supportive business environments. And we have been collaborating for the last 1.5 years with small business centers throughout North Carolina to help farmers and food businesses strengthen their business and marketing planning. And so we're thrilled to have them as a collaborator. So the platform, again, as Terry mentioned, you'll be automatically muted. It helps us cut down on background noise and data overload. We want you to submit your questions through the chat box or Q&A tab, and we will answer questions at the end of the webinar. If you have trouble, try to send us a private message, and we'll try to address that. But again, if the platform is not working for you, and for bandwidth or some other reason, be assured that you will get the full webinar after we meet today. Okay, so I said that you'll receive the PDF and the link. And also let us know, give us some feedback about other topics you would like to see us address in the coming months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Currey Nobles. He is going to start the webinar, and Lynette will do the last half. So welcome, Currey. I'm going to hand it over to you now. What am I doing? Is Currey on now?
Yeah, Currey, you can share your screen.
Yep.
Okay,
all righty. We're good to go?
Yep, we're ready.
All right. Well, thanks again for having us on. Lynette and I we're excited to talk to you guys sort of about who we are, what we do, and as you can see by the name of our presentation here, we're going to try to give you some background information on food safety, specific regulations, and how they might apply to either your specific operations or people that you deal with. So we'll go ahead and get started. So like I said, just as an overview, we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are, why Lynette and I were hired, sort of what our roles are, and then we also have some counterparts that we work with through NC State as well as cooperative extension, and sort of kind of tell you about our team approach to these new food safety regulations that we're dealing with. And then we'll try to get into answering some questions and trying to figure out who does regulate your food product that you produce. And just like Laura was saying, sometimes things can be confusing. There is a lot of gray area in this food safety, this regulatory world. And so we're going to try to keep things high level, but give you some information that can hopefully be applied to specific situations. And so, yeah, so that'll be dealing with federal and state agencies and their jurisdictions as well, and where there's any potential overlap there. Lynette will spend some time talking about where specifically you can make food products. There are some food products that you can only make in certain locations, depending on the risk of those products and depending on the product characteristics. So we'll spend some time talking about that. So Lynette will get into whether it's a commercial operation or a home-based food business. And then we'll get into some specific food safety regulations and looking at where the FDA, where they keep their food safety regulations and what products they apply to, basically so you can have a better answer of to what rules do I need to follow if I want to make a specific food product. And then Lynette will close things down this afternoon with looking at some real world examples of different types of salsa production, depending on how you make that salsa and depending on where you're selling that salsa will change what agencies you're regulated by. So that's just sort of a roadmap of where we're going, and we'll dive on in. So Lynette and I, we are area specialized agents. Like I said, we're sort of housed, or we work cooperatively between North Carolina State University in Raleigh, as well as Cooperative Extension. Just how Extension has area specialized agents for horticulture, aquaculture, poultry processing, lots of different things. We are area specialized agents focusing on food safety, specifically for food manufacturers. So we were hired, we came on about a year and a half ago. We were hired in response to the new food safety regulations that were now being passed down. And so specifically, we're talking about the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA. So you might have some familiarity with that. This is not a FSMA talk, but if you have questions about FSMA and more, you need more information about that, feel free to contact us. So like I said, there are actually 5 of us hired. Lynette and I to focus on food manufacturing and food processing. There were 2 other area specialized agents hired to focus on produce safety and on-farm food safety. And then there was another area specialized agent hired to focus on animal feed safety and animal food production, because now under FSMA, that's regulated very similarly to how human food is regulated. So that was sort of the impetus behind these positions. That's why we came on, and we're really to, like I said, we're housed here on NC State's campus in the Department of Food, Bioprocessing, and Nutrition Sciences at NC State University in Raleigh. Both Lynette and I are housed here, but we cover the whole state. Cover the whole state from Raleigh. We travel a lot. We like to get out and see different parts of the state and interact with people doing lots of different food manufacturing operations here in the state. So like I said, we're working with food manufacturers, food processors throughout North Carolina. So we have, like I said, we've been here for about a year and a half. We've dealt with lots of different food manufacturing commodities, dairies, bakeries, just about any type of food manufacturing product that you could think of. There is someone in North Carolina that's doing it. So North Carolina we have about 2,100 FDA registered food processing facilities. So Lynette will kind of talk about it, but just in general, if you're making a food product, you probably have to register your business, your food operation with the FDA. And like I said, we have about 2,100 here in North Carolina, so spanning a wide range of food manufacturing operations. So we're excited to be here in North Carolina. And like I said, we like to see lots of different parts of the state. So that's just sort of us, who we are, why we were hired, why we're here. And so now we'll start getting into more of the meat of this webinar. So a question Lynette and I get a lot of times is, who regulates my food product? What regulations do I fall under from a food safety perspective? And once again, this is focusing on food manufactured food. So Lynette will talk about retail food and restaurants and things like that a little bit later on, but this is focusing on manufactured food. So who regulates your food product? It depends on where you're selling that product. So are you selling your product across the country? Are you selling your product across the world? Or are you selling your product just within North Carolina state lines? And so depending on where your product is going, that's going to kick you either from state-based jurisdiction into federal jurisdiction. And so that's really the first question to ask is where is my product going? Who am I selling it to? Where am I selling it? Is this product going across state lines? So if you're just selling it locally within the state, you're probably going to be just under state level jurisdiction, as opposed to if it's going across state lines, which would put you under federal jurisdiction. So like I said, interstate commerce, so if it's going outside the state lines, it's subject to federal jurisdiction. So you're going to be subject to, as we'll talk about in the next slide, federal agencies are going to regulate your product from a food safety perspective. Whereas if the product is staying within the state lines, intra-state commerce, it's subject just to state jurisdiction. And so you'd be regulated by state level agencies. And so it's like we said, if that product is going over state lines, whether through wholesale markets or even online sales, so internet sales are considered interstate commerce. And so once that product crosses over the state lines, it comes under federal jurisdiction. And so just sort of keep that in mind as we go through this. This idea will come up later on as Lynette's talking about her salsa examples at the end. But just looking at things from interstate is going to be more on the federal jurisdiction because you're crossing state lines. Intrastate, if you're staying within state lines, you're going to be subject to state level jurisdiction. So yeah, so who are those agencies, both on the federal and the state level? Who are the agencies that have jurisdiction over food safety? So this slide will look at federal jurisdiction. So one of the main food safety agencies from a federal perspective is the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And so when you're figuring out what the FDA regulates, it's actually easier to figure out what the FDA doesn't regulate. And so as you can see here on the slide, they regulate about 80% of the food supply in the United States because the FDA, they have jurisdiction, they regulate most foods except meat, poultry, and processed egg products. While there are some caveats, while there are some specific exemptions and exceptions, from a general perspective, FDA has jurisdiction over everything except meat, poultry, and processed egg products. So they inspect shelled eggs in the shell. They inspect seafood and fishery products, but meat and poultry and processed egg products are inspected by another agency that I'll talk about here in a minute. But the FDA, like I said, they've got 80% of the food supply. So they inspect imported foods. They inspect, now under FSMA, they can inspect produce farms and fruit and vegetable production processing. So they have a lot of responsibility from a food safety perspective. And so FDA also operates under a non-continuous inspection model. So that basically means you might see an FDA inspector once a year, once every 2 years, just depending on your product, depending on your process, depending on how large your company is. You're not going to have an FDA inspector in your facility every time when you're producing food, which is in contrast to the USDA. The United States Department of Agriculture is also responsible for food safety regulations in the United States. So, as you can probably guess, the USDA regulates meat, poultry, and processed egg products. The USDA also regulates catfish and catfish-related species, whereas the FDA regulates all other types of seafood. Catfish is regulated under the USDA. So like I said, things can get complicated. There are some specific caveats how catfish are in the USDA. That's always a good example to point out. And also, like I said, in contrast to the FDA, the USDA operates under a continuous inspection model. So basically that means that if you're producing a meat, poultry, processed egg, or catfish product, you are going to have somebody from the USDA in your facility, either at the beginning of the day or throughout the day when you're actually producing food. And so they have a smaller number of commodities, but their inspectional approach is much more intense, much more in depth than what the FDA does. So those are really the two big federal agencies that have jurisdiction over food safety. And so as we'll talk about, they look at food safety, the FDA and the USDA, they look at food safety in a little different manner. They have different specific systems and food safety systems that they have in place for producers to follow these regulations. So this is, like I said, this is a very broad, brief overview, but just to give you a general idea, you have the FDA and then you have the USDA that are responsible for the majority of food safety regulations here in the United States. So that's looking at things from a federal level. Now, we'll look at things from a state level. So like I said, if you're only selling your product within state lines, if you're in doing intrastate commerce, you're going to be only subject to state level jurisdiction and state level agencies. And so once again, we're only talking about processed food, processed and manufactured food. And so, yeah, so that processed food is regulated by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or as I and Lynette will be referring to them throughout the rest of the presentation, as the NCDA. And so within the NCDA, there's lots of divisions, lots of different components of the NCDA that deal with different parts of agriculture. But the ones that deal with food safety are the Food and Drug Protection Division and the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division. And so basically these two divisions within NCDA serve, they're analogous to the FDA and the USDA. So the Food and Drug Protection Division in the NCDA, they really behave very similarly to the FDA. So they regulate basically everything that's not meat, poultry, or processed eggs. The Meat and Poultry Inspection Division, they are the state's branch of regulations that would follow the USDA. So they inspect, as you can tell by the name, they inspect meat and poultry products. And so their systems, the idea of continuous versus non-continuous inspections still holds the same. So if you are producing a meat and poultry product that's just for intrastate commerce, you will have somebody from the NCDA Meat and Poultry Inspection Division in your facility while you're producing food. Whereas if you're making a product that's regulated by the Food and Drug Protection Division in the NCDA, you're not going to have somebody in your facility the entire time when you're producing food. So yes, like I said, both of these agencies can serve as state level agencies. If you're focused specifically on just intrastate commerce, you don't have anything going across state lines. But North Carolina, these North Carolina level agencies can also sign contracts with the FDA to perform federal level inspections. And so that would be for product going into interstate commerce. So if you remember back to the last slide, the FDA has about 80% of the food supply. So they are very short staffed in a sense. And so the FDA contracts with state level partners to sort of take on some of that inspectional burden away from the FDA because they don't have the manpower to provide those inspectional services. So North Carolina is one of those states that signs contracts with the FDA to perform federal level inspections with basically state level employees. So they can kind of wear two hats depending on, like I said, where that product is going. Is it going intrastate commerce? Is it staying within the state lines? Or is it going across state lines into interstate commerce? So yeah, so that's federal level, and this was state level jurisdiction. And so now we'll get into some of the specific regulations that could apply to your food product. So depending on what products you make is going to determine if you're under FDA or USDA jurisdiction. And then within these, we'll specifically be focusing on FDA regulated products. There are specific regulations that apply to different types of products. And so all of these regulations that I'm going to mention are going to be found in Chapter 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. And that's really just where FDA stores, that's where their food safety regulations are codified in the Federal Register. So CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations, and we're going to be dealing with things in Chapter 21. So depending on what product you're producing, what product you're manufacturing, is going to determine what CFR that you need to follow. So 21 CFR Part 112 deals with produce safety. So like I said, now under FSMA, this is one of the new rules under FSMA is the produce safety rule. And so now FDA has jurisdiction, food safety jurisdiction over produce farms and the growing and harvesting of fruits and vegetables. And so those regulations are found in 21 CFR Part 112. And so yeah, that deals with on-farm operations as well as packing operations, packing sheds, that sort of thing. 21 CFR 113 deals with low acid canned foods. And so those are higher risk products. And so they have their own specific set of regulations found in 21 CFR Part 113, that if you're making a low acid canned food, you have to follow specific guidelines, specific regulations to make sure that food is safely produced. And then 21 CFR Part 114 deals with acidified foods. And so low acid canned foods and acidified foods are very similar, but as you can tell by the names, one has a high acid content, one doesn't have a high acid content. And so both of those types of products are, like I said, higher risk products. And so they have their own specific set of regulations that if you want to make those types of food products, you're going to have to follow these regulations. So yeah, some examples of food products that would be regulated under these different types of regulations. Leafy greens, those are produce, that's a produce item, so those are going to be regulated under Part 112. An example of a low acid canned food would be green beans. So any type of shelf-stable vegetable, canned soups, those sorts of things are going to be classified as low acid canned foods. An acidified food, one that you might see either at a farmer's market or on the shelves in some grocery stores. Pickles, they're a great example of an acidified food. Once again, a shelf-stable acidified food. But lots of barbecue sauces, salsas, marinades, those sorts of things are going to be classified as acidified foods and would fall under 21 CFR Part 114. Some more regulations that would apply to other specific types of food products. We have 21 CFR Part 117. And so this is really, it's called the Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule. And so this is a new rule of FSMA. This is what Lynette and I were really hired in response to. And so most of the food products that we deal with are going to be regulated under this specific regulation, this 117. And so within 21 CFR 117, there's this idea of good manufacturing practices. And so they're actually within Part 117. And the GMPs, good manufacturing practices, apply to basically all manufactured food products, no matter if it's a low acid canned food or an acidified food or any type of food product is going to have to follow GMPs. And so GMPs, they basically just set the basis for just general sanitary practices to make sure your food is produced in a sanitary environment. And so that's where the new GMPs are found in Part 117. If you're manufacturing a juice product, so any type of fruit or vegetable juice, the specific regulations are going to be under 21 CFR Part 120. And so juice is a higher risk product. And so they once again have their own specific set of regulations there. Like I said, FDA has jurisdiction over all seafood and fishery products except for catfish and catfish related species. And so there's some specific seafood regulations focused on seafood safety that are found in 21 CFR Part 123. And also Lynette and I, we've dealt with some bottled water manufacturers. Bottled water has their own specific set of regulations that's found in 21 CFR Part 129. So some examples of food products that would fall under 117, the Preventive Controls Rule, lots of any type of baked good. So cookies, cakes, crackers, anything like that, that would fall under 21 CFR Part 117. Juice, if you're making apple juice, you're making vegetable juice, that's going to be subject to 21 CFR Part 120. And then any type of seafood or fishery product is going to be subject to 21 CFR Part 123. And then once again, all of these products that I've talked about are still going to be subject to the good manufacturing practices, those GMPs that are going to apply to all different types of manufactured food products. And so just to sort of wrap up this part about regulations, like I said, Lynette and I, we were hired for outreach, for education, and for training purposes. So for really each one of those regulations that I just talked about, there are some required trainings to help the people subject to those regulations understand what's required, what they need to do, and how they can become compliant and follow those rules so that they're manufacturing safe food products that aren't going to get people sick and injure people. So if If you're growing a produce product, that's regulated under 21 CFR Part 112. There's a produce safety rule grower training. So some of you might be familiar with this. Some of you might have taken this. Lynette and I help deliver these courses. It's not our focus. Like I said, there are 2 ASAs that are focused on produce safety that this training is their focus. If you're making a low acid canned food or an acidified food, regulated under Part 113 or 114, you have to attend a better process control school, or if you've been around here in North Carolina for a while, you might have heard it referred to as pickle school. So if you want to make pickles, if you want to make an acidified product, you have to attend training to understand what process controls you need to put in place to make sure that that product is safe. And so, yeah, you're looking at identifying hazard, what controls you can put in place, and this idea of a scheduled process is basically paperwork that you have to submit to the FDA to say, this is how I'm going to make my product. These are the steps that I'm going to put in, my heat treatment, my acidification, anything like that. And you have to follow that scheduled process. Juice, like I said, under Part 120, juice is regulated under the idea of hazard analysis and critical control point system, or a HACCP system. And so there is HACCP training specific for juice manufacturers. Same thing with seafood. So seafood is also regulated under a HACCP system to make sure that those products are safely produced. And so there's the training that Lynette and I were hired in response to is that training for 21 CFR Part 117, the preventive controls for human food training. It's technically not required. It is highly, highly recommended. And it is a great resource just to learn about the rule, learn what's required, and learn about new FSMA as a whole, and understand what has changed in the wake of FSMA. All the other ones are specifically required, but 117 not required, but highly beneficial for anybody who wants to get into the food manufacturing world. And so yeah, so that training under 117 spends a lot of time looking at GMPs and this idea of a preventive controls food safety plan, which is similar to a HACCP plan, but there are some distinct differences. And then luckily for you, all of these trainings are offered through NC State University. And so we have a lot of great food safety resources here on campus that can help you with these trainings, with these rules, and make sure that you're doing what you should be doing. So yeah, so our contact information is at the end. And so if you have more questions about these rules or these trainings, we can go from there. So that is the end of my portion. I'm going to turn it over to Lynette.
Great. Make sure I can get it here. All right, everybody with me? Okay, thanks, Curry. I appreciate that. So Curry brought up the question of who regulates my food product, and that, like Curry mentioned, we always get a lot of questions about that, and that definitely can be a hard question to answer. And so I want to dig a little deeper into trying to do just that, answer that question. The first thing we're going to talk about, getting deeper into answering that question, is the type of business. And we're going to look at 3 different types of businesses here, one being a retail establishment, second being a home processor, and third looking at the commercial processor. Keep in mind that a home processor and a commercial processor, those are the type of businesses that are going to be packaging or preparing and packaging their products for further sale. Now, let's just dig a little deeper into a retail establishment briefly. So what about my food truck? You know, many of us have been to food trucks and we love the type of food that we get from these type of operations. But a food truck would fall under the category of a retail establishment, and, you know, along with restaurants, caterers. And the point to this, to a retail establishment and defining a retail establishment, is these are the operations that are going to be selling their products for immediate consumption or directly to the end consumer, okay? And so when we answer that question, or we want to answer that question of who regulates my food product, and we're making this product for immediate consumption, these type of products, okay, that are prepared in a permitted establishment, such as a restaurant or a food truck or a caterer, these would be regulated by county health departments, okay? Or your local health department, which does include your county health department, and in some cases may indeed include municipal oversight. At the end of this presentation, I'll actually give you a phone number where you can call if you do have questions about these type of retail establishments. But keep in mind, you know, our focus for this specific webinar is really looking at those food processors, okay, that are preparing and packaging their food for further sale. So then that leads me into these next two type of establishments, such as a home processor and a commercial processor. All right, so someone or a company or a small business, an entrepreneur, could decide that they want to prepare their foods at home. Okay, the important point to make here is that if an entrepreneur or small business does indeed want to prepare their products at home, the only type of products that can be prepared and packaged at home would be those low-risk packaged foods, okay? Examples of that, and this is according to NCDA's website, include certain categories of baked goods, for example, like a loaf of bread, jams and jellies, candies, dried mixes, spices, certain sauces and liquids, and pickles and acidified foods. But it's important to remember, just exactly what Currey was just talking about, that certain foods or specific foods are going to be tied or associated with specific regulations. So just because we categorize this as a low-risk food, such as pickles and acidified foods, know that that is associated with a specific regulation. If you remember 21 CFR 114, okay? So, that would mean that the home processor would have to have, mandatory training, a filed process with a processing authority, and that processing would indeed need to be under the control of a certified supervisor. Yeah. And keep in mind as well, any type of products, so we talked about the retail establishments, those retail establishments such as a restaurant or a food truck can only sell those products that are indeed prepared in that permitted establishment. In other words, you couldn't make your products at home and then sell it for immediate consumption in a restaurant. All right, on the flip side of low-risk products, all right, what products cannot be made in a home-based processing environment? So high-risk products cannot be made in the home. They must be made in a commercial facility. So examples of high-risk products would include refrigerated or frozen products, low-acid canned foods, dairy products, seafood products, bottled water. And what do we mean by high risk versus low risk? High risk just means that we're looking at the risk of microbial contamination or that risk for a public health outbreak or a recall. Okay, so looking at refrigerated or frozen products, we're relying on that refrigeration to maintain the safety of that product. Dairy products, has been associated with outbreaks and definitely a concern for in public health if not processed correctly, for example. So some of the home processing requirements, you must at least meet 21 CFR 110. So we're talking about those good manufacturing practices that Currey mentioned. These will soon indeed become 117. One thing to note here that I don't have on this slide is that home processing or home processors would fall under the jurisdiction of NCDA Food and Drug Protection Division. So that's something to keep in mind. Remember, our retail establishments fall under your local health department, whereas we get into home processing, you fall under NCDA, okay? And also, know your product. Understand if there's a regulation that's associated with your specific product, such as acidified foods or processing seafood. But again, processing seafood wouldn't be done at home because that would be a high-risk food. All right, now we move on to commercial businesses. For those that are indeed processing or preparing high-risk foods, they don't have a choice. They've got to make that product into at a commercial business. So this would be an operation that would indeed be registered with the FDA. Okay. In this case, all food processors, all facilities must comply with GMPs in 21 CFR 110. Or as known now as 110, soon to be 117. And again, some of the products would be associated with other other regulations depending on the product. And the last point to make here is that some shared use facilities could be considered a commercial business, but it's important to note that the business itself would need to be be registered with the FDA, okay, the actual client of that shared use facility. Okay, so this leads us to the example of the salsa, and I want to give a shout out to our friends, our fellow ASAs or area specialized agents, including Rachel McDowell, Candace Christian, and Debbie Stroud for sharing this example with us. It's a fantastic example to help you go through this process of answering that question that can be difficult, but who does regulate my food product? So let's take a look at salsa here. So let's say we've got this great recipe for salsa, and the ingredients included in this case would be tomatoes, onions, peppers, lime juice, cilantro, salt, and pepper. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But when we look at how we're going to make this product and who we're going to sell it to, when we look at jurisdictions, food safety regulations, it does become more complex, right? So let's look at the different scenarios that could possibly be looked at with the sale of salsa. So a food truck. You know, we're going to be selling this product as a side item within our menu. So we're looking at receiving, preparation, cold storage, and we're going to simply serve that for immediate consumption. Other cases here would be fresh for sale, where we're receiving, preparing, packaging, okay, that's the key there, and we're relying on cold storage, okay, for the safety of this product, and we're selling that product in packaged tubs. And then finally, we're going to look at the example that is canned for sale. We're actually going to prepare and acidify and heat that salsa as part of the process and sell in a shelf-stable condition. So let's look at each different scenario in greater detail. So our salsa scenario for the food truck, right? I've thrown out 4 questions here that I think definitely help in answering that question, who regulates my food product? You can apply this to not only salsa, but maybe for your own product or your clients or stakeholders that you're working with. And those 4 questions are, 1, what am I making? Where am I preparing my product? Okay. How am I preparing the product? And to whom will I sell the product? And we'll go through each of those questions and understand how that can help us answer that big question of who regulates my product. So 1, what am I making? In this case, for the food truck, I'm making fresh salsa for a side item. Where am I preparing my product? It's prepared in a food truck, okay? And you can apply this to, say, a restaurant, but the key point here is that it must be a permitted establishment. How am I preparing the product? It's sliced, it's mixed, refrigerated, okay? This gets us into thinking about, okay, what's the risk level of this product? Okay, is it a high-risk product? And we'll get into that in just a second. And then to whom will I sell the product? In this case, it's for immediate consumption. So how does that help us answer the question of what jurisdiction or who's going to be inspecting my product? So regulatory oversight, because it's for immediate consumption and prepared at a permitted establishment, in this case it would be a food truck, the oversight would be your local health department, and the regulation getting into the specific, you know, what am I inspected against, what enforcement, that would be the North Carolina Food Code. Food safety considerations in this case, since we are working with tomatoes, sliced tomatoes, that would be what used to be known as potentially hazardous food. Now what's considered a TCS food, or time temperature control for safety. They would need proper cold storage. So those would be the things that would be a part of your practices that would need to be definitely maintained in order to produce a safe product. So that's looking at the retail scenario. Right, let's look at this product if we were to want to sell it, say, at a farmer's market, okay? So again, going back to those 4 questions and asking yourself, what am I making? In this case, we're making packaged salsa. When we see the word packaged, right, we should think now bring in the NCDA. Okay, that's a key word when we're processing and packaging, right? That changes our jurisdiction. Where am I preparing my product? In this case, right, we've got a high-risk product here. In this case, we're making packaged salsa that's going to be sliced, mixed, packaged, and refrigerated. If you think back to what those high-risk items were, okay, one of them being a refrigerated product, this now means that we cannot make this particular product at home. It must be made at a commercial business, or in other words, at an FDA-registered facility. And then to whom will I sell this product? In this case, if we are just going to be selling it at the farmer's market, we're going to be selling it within intrastate commerce. And so, therefore, the regulatory oversight would be under NCDA, Food and Drug Protection Division. And some of the specifics of those regulations would include good manufacturing practices. So considerations here would be cold storage, temperature, right? And that, again, this type of product being a refrigerated product would indeed be a high-risk product where we could not make this product at home. Right, so let's look at the third scenario, right? This is canned for sale, right? In this case, what are we making? We're making a shelf-stable salsa. And where am I preparing this product? I'm going to make it at home. In this case, remember, acidified products can indeed be made at home. They're considered low-risk products, okay? But keep in mind, you could indeed make this product at a commercial processing facility. How am I preparing the product? It's sliced, it's mixed, acidified, heated, and jarred. Keywords there would be acidified. In this case, to whom am I going to sell the product? Let's say we're going to make this, we're going to sell it in interstate commerce, which changes things. We're selling it wholesale. So now our regulatory oversight would not only be the North Carolina Department of Ag, but also FDA, because we're crossing state lines, okay? And as with all facilities and all process, whether you're at home or a commercial business, you would be subject to good manufacturing practices. In this case, keep in mind, this is a great example of knowing your product and knowing what regulation is tied with that product. Because in this case, this particular acidified product would indeed be under the regulation of Title 21 CFR 114 and 108. That's a registration for this particular commercial facility and this product. So we've got GMPs, which is 110, soon to be 117, 21 CFR 114 and 108. 3 regulations tied with that product, right? As far as food safety considerations here, for this to make, in order to make an acidified product, there's required training that Currey talked about, a filed scheduled process, and then of course this product would need to be processed, packaged, and under the control of a certified supervisor. Okay, so great scenarios. Again, we thank our collaborators, Rachel, Debbie, Candace, for sharing this with us because it does spell out just sort of the complexity of, here we are making very similar products, but we're making it at different locations and selling it to different geographies, be it interstate versus intrastate, all of which can definitely change the jurisdiction we're under, as well as the regulation itself. Right. So just know that I know a lot of times we go through this, the more you learn, maybe the more questions you may have. We are fortunate in this state that we can work with the North Carolina Department of Ag, who are excellent people who provide information. They truly do take on the attitude of educate before you regulate. And if you have any questions, of course you can contact Currey and I, but it's always smart to get in touch with the NCDA, with the compliance officer. And as you see here, there are the phone numbers here for not only the Food and Drug Division, but also the Meat and Poultry Division, as well as their website, which gives you this information that both Currey and I have shared here. For those retail establishments, certainly can call the North Carolina DHHS Division of Public Health in their environmental health section. Currey mentioned that we do offer training for the preventive controls for human food. Keep in mind that if you are a processor, you will be impacted by this regulation, okay? And we did mention that it's not required, but as of now, I can't think of any other way to learn this from, looking at the rule and having someone teach you, but know that there are regulations or there are requirements for certain larger processors that would indeed have to write up a full-blown food safety plan. In that case, it would have to be done over with the development of a preventive controls qualified individual should be a part of that. So this is one way to become that preventive controls qualified individual. And again, it's another way to better understand this new regulation for processors. So feel free to contact us. Again, we're going to be going throughout the state here. You can see our training dates throughout North Carolina. If you need more information, the registration for that can be found on our website. But always feel free to contact either Currey or myself if you do have questions. And again, the website can provide more information if you do have questions. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Laura and take any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynette and Curry. That was a lot of information to share. We do have some questions, but I do want to point out this research to y'all that we published late last year, the Guide to Kitchens and Food Hubs. This is a live link that you have that you'll get when you get the presentation. But this is a fantastic guide for all the kitchens that responded to us. And the directory will show you what types of services they offer, what kind of equipment, what they charge per hour, and of course where they're located. So this is a great resource for y'all that we're very excited about. The next slide, Lynette, can you advance the next slide for me?
Oh, yes, yes.
We're going to do our questions now. Okay, so one question I tried to look up was, who is responsible for the oversight of processing CBD oils for hemp?
I think that is unknown at the time.
Okay.
I know we've heard a couple people talk about this is a product that they would like to get into because it is a very nice value-added product that they can manufacture and market, but I don't know exactly where in the regulatory.
Right. I think the best answer for that is to contact NCDA because there are a lot of unknowns in that category.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have, when I got that question, I reached out to Emily Feblis from the NC Hemp Commission and haven't heard back from her yet. But Douglas, I will be sure and get that information back to you.
Yeah, that's a hot topic for sure.
Yes, it is. It's very exciting. So we got another question. Is milled corn for grits and cornmeal considered a processed food? Can you touch on the regulations for selling milled grain?
Yes, if indeed it is going to go to human food, that would be a processed product, yes. And of course, that would fall under 21 CFR 117 for that particular product.
Okay, thank you. What about kombucha, sales at a farmer's market, if it's both on draft and bottled? A fermented beverage.
Right.
So this kind of goes back to our packaged salsa in a way. You know, if you're bottling, packaging that product, it would fall under North Carolina Department of Ag's jurisdiction. And again, it goes back to, it wouldn't be considered as a fermented product, so it's not an acidified product, but it would definitely fall under the preventive controls or 21 CFR 117, good manufacturing practices, and potentially a full food safety plan would potentially need to be written.
Okay, great. Can you direct us to where those the description of the good manufacturing practices can be found, so folks would know what they're getting into?
Yeah, we can send you. We can send it to you the link to the actual regulation, but there's also a good document from the university that sort of breaks it down, sort of step by step. There are about 8 or 9 like subsections that comprise the GMPs, dealing with personnel hygiene, dealing with just general sanitation, equipment, utensils, things like that. So we can pass that document along and then you can share it with the participants.
Okay, that'll be great. I will send that out. Is there a financial profit threshold for regulations? Say you don't earn up to a certain amount before these regulations kick in for your products?
That's a fantastic question. The FDA, in regards to the Food Safety Modernization Act, and specifically looking at the preventive controls for human food rule, there is a threshold. So the FDA intended not to be overburdensome with these new mandates. So for example, for the preventive controls rule, for those companies that generate less than $1 million in average sales, and that's averaged over 3 years. For those companies that average less than $1 million sales, they're only subject to a part of the regulation. And just know that regardless of size, all processors must comply with good manufacturing practices. But for those very small businesses, again, those sales of less than $1 million, they may, or they would be considered exempt from writing up their entire or a full preventive controls food safety plan. That's something definitely we can talk with people. You know, we could spend an hour just talking about that regulation in and of itself. But absolutely, there are thresholds based on sales. Yes.
And with all of the rules of FSMA, there's sort of that sort of tiered compliance based off of business sales, both for the human food, for animal food, as well as for produce.
Right.
The business does determine your compliance activities.
Okay. Where do we find the NC food code?
That you could certainly, you can know just a simple Google. Note that, you know, you could look up the FDA food code and find information that you may need to find there. I believe, Curry, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know probably Candace, Rachel, and Debbie are cringing out there if they're listening to this, but North Carolina has adopted the 2009 version and soon to adopt the 2013, from my understanding.
Yeah, the food code is amended every 2 years by the FDA. So the North Carolina is currently operating under the 2009 version,
Right.
But the 2017 version was just published and released. So there might be a push to start operating under the 2017 version. But yeah, you can find them online. I'm sure if you go to North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website, they would also have information about the food code. But we can try to find that and send you a direct link if necessary.
Okay, great. Alrighty, I think we have a couple more questions. Is there a list of where you determine what is acidified and acidified food? For instance, would hot sauce be considered an acidified food depending on the ingredients potentially?
Yeah, so there's actually a service here at NC State that you can send a sample of your product, and they will evaluate that product and tell you, is it an acidified food, or there's another classification called an acid food. And they will also perform pH testing, water activity testing, and they can write process authority letters, which is one of the requirements, or it goes into that, one of the requirements for acidified food regulations. So it's called the entrepreneurial program, but it's housed in the same department here that Lynette and I are housed in. So we can send you a link to their website as well. And they also perform services for nutritional facts panels and nutritional labeling. So that's another service that they provide.
Okay, fantastic. We will send that link along. Let me see. I think we have one more question. Is head lettuce cut into lettuce mix considered a processed food?
Say that one more time.
If head lettuce is cut into a lettuce mix, is that considered processed?
Yes, I would say so. Of course, you know, we definitely want to, you know, for this question, we definitely want to learn more about the process, but based on what you said, I would say yes, it would be considered a processed food.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I believe we've answered all questions. Let me just check chat one more time. All right. Well, thank you. I think everyone would agree that that is a lot of information presented in a really great format. There's one more slide, if you could, there you go. So our next webinar is April 26th with Annette Dunlap, and she will also be talking about wonderful resources at the North Carolina Department of Ag around marketing. So it's a very good segue from this one about how NCDA works with food and farming manufacturers and growers. So I encourage you all to register for that. And I want to thank you, Lynette and Curry and Terry, for hosting us from the Central Carolina Community College Small Business Center. We really appreciate this, and it's great to know that y'all are there to continue to help food and farming businesses, and that you'll offer these trainings. I know a question might be, is there a fee for the trainings, Lynette and Curry?
There is a fee, but we have one of our colleagues has gotten some Golden Leaf grant funding to offset that cost, way down from what it's normally being offered. And so I think there's also, if you register early, there's a discount for that. So all that fee, the fees can be found on our website, on our registration website. So.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again. It's a great resource, and we appreciate your time. So that's it for today, everybody. Thanks again, and we'll see you next month on April 26th for our next webinar with Annette Dunlap. Bye, everybody.
All right, thanks, Laura. Bye.
Uh-oh, one more. Okay, end meeting. Oh, I stopped recording.